Happy Sunday. Sorry that this video took so long. It was supposed to be Thursday and it was crazy with travel coming back from Pittsburgh, and I got to see so many of you last weekend at the First Love workshop, which was amazing. Thank you all for those of you who came. And I'm super excited to dive into this today, and I think it's appropriate that for me personally, and I think that this happens a lot as leaders and entrepreneurs, we find that we have to go through what we teach first. And for me, last week felt like I needed a lot of boundaries. I needed to be gentle with myself in being able to commit to things in a way that felt good instead of pushing through or just doing it because I said I was going to do it with no passion behind it or no excitement. So thank you for bearing with me, and this training is going to be really, really fun today. So thank you for being here, for those of you joining us live, and for those of you watching the replay, this is going to be a really, really great training. So first of all, let me introduce myself to all of you who I may not know yet. I'm Emily Castle. I'm a Soulful Success Coach for women leaders and entrepreneurs, and I'm also the host of the Sexy Soulful Success podcast. And I really believe that when a woman fully embraces and expresses her innate feminine wisdom, it impacts her future, our future as women, and the future of the world in a really powerful and beautiful way. And in all that I do, I take into account the whole woman from a psychological, cultural, primal, global, and intuitive perspective, and help the women that I work with to create soulful strategies for their lives and businesses that allow them to make the impact they're here to create as they refine their mission and step up and out into their leadership. And just so you know, I do private coaching with women. I do group coaching in my program, the Soulful Success Collective, which is rolling admission. So if you're interested in joining us for that, or you want more information about that, you can reach out to me. And I have some half-day intensive spots open for March. So if you're interested in that and you want a day of soulful strategy together in Charleston, I would love to invite you into that. So I can share a little bit more at the end of this training about those two things and share links with you and things to apply and get yourself set up. So we're here today talking about boundaries and vulnerability in business. And I think that these two things are so, so important for many different reasons. One, because they inevitably come up all the time. And two, because they are things that if we don't master them and we're not aware of what's going on, we oftentimes self-sabotage or create a business and situations and relationships that don't feel truly fulfilling. And when that happens, we end up resenting our work instead of truly loving our work, even if what we do is something that we're very, very passionate about and we got into because we love it. Ultimately, the way in which we do something is so much more important than what we actually do. And so when we don't have a way of relating or strategy to actually create fulfillment in what it is that we do, and that usually involves vulnerability and boundaries, we end up building resentment, and ultimately that doesn't make our careers or our lives or our missions sustainable. And that's something that I'm really, really firm about in my coaching practice, is that whatever I do and whatever I'm helping a woman to create, many different things, but we look at all of those different points of what makes something sustainable or not. And that's from an energetic perspective and from a contextual perspective of what's happening in her life and what her other life goals are, looking at everything from a holistic lens and not just from an isolated single focus perspective. So let's see, what do I want to dive into first here? And I think also I want to mention that boundaries and vulnerability tend to feel like, in some way, the opposite, right? The opposite of each other, or there's some kind of polarity there that we associate with boundaries and vulnerability. And I think a lot of times what we perceive to be true when we think about it, first off, is boundaries can feel like barriers and vulnerability can feel like weakness, right? And so the intention for today's training is to help you reframe those two things and view both as really powerful tools and strengths that you can draw on in order to create more sexy success in your life and business, but also to give you some strategies and answer some questions around things that some women in the community have asked me to speak about when it comes to my own business, my own experience, and my best suggestions for coaching around certain things. So we'll dive in there. And so first I want to sort of define each of these things. So boundaries, from my perspective, help us to create sacred space for more of what we do want and less of what we don't want. And ultimately, boundaries help us to teach others how to treat and interact with us, right? So we're sort of like setting up guidelines. Boundaries can happen in an informal way, like a conversation or just even an energetic shift. And they can also happen in something that feels more concrete, like a contract or something like that, or an agreement that somebody signs, or a conversation that you have that's like upfront as a preventative thing. And often we think that if we set a boundary or we say no to something, that the opportunity won't come again or that will disappoint someone. And really, I want to invite all of us into a new perspective that says, when I stand up for what's right for me in every moment, which sometimes is going to mean saying no to things that feel out of alignment, then I give other people permission to do the same for themselves in their own lives and ultimately to create more fulfillment for all of us. So when I say no, or when I set a boundary, or when I stand up for what I need and want in life, I'm giving the other person on the other side of that boundary or the other side of that conversation or the other side of that contract permission to also claim and stand up for what they want in their lives and what's a yes for them and what's a no for them. And I think a lot of times the reason we don't set boundaries is because we feel like we don't have permission, or it feels like we can't. It feels like it's not okay in some way to say no, or to assert ourselves in something, or to say that's unacceptable, or to, we can internalize all kinds of messages that we specifically as women have internalized over time and over generations about what it means when a woman speaks up for herself, right? She's bossy, or she's fill in the blank, right? And if she doesn't, then she's a pushover, and she's easy, and she's weak, and whatever. So I think part of this conversation, we would be remiss to move forward in this conversation if we didn't acknowledge the fact that for us as women, there is this cultural, societal lineage bias that we just come into this conversation with around what it means about us if we set a boundary, or if we stand up for what we need, or when we express ourselves and our needs in life and business. So keep that in mind as we're moving through here. Okay, so that's boundaries. Vulnerability, I think, is a tough one for us as women, especially when it comes to the workplace or business, because we feel like we have to have it all together in order to lead others and be perfect, quote unquote, or only put our best selves forward. And while I don't believe we should necessarily be sharing and blasting social media with unprocessed emotions, I do believe that it is critical for us as women leaders today to lead with vulnerability, and instead of a more traditional hierarchical model that patriarchy has implemented, have a more inclusive, community-focused leadership where we are not above those that we lead, but beside those that we lead. And what I've seen for a long time as well is ambitious women tending to have this thing happen where we shut off our emotions, even though our emotional intelligence and our emotional capacity is one of our greatest assets when it comes to business and leadership, because it really helps us to sense and connect with others more deeply and to lead using our fullest selves and most powerful expression. And so oftentimes what happens is we shut that off, and then we end up saying, oh, why don't I feel totally powerful in this situation, right? And I know for some of us, we've had instances in the workplace where we have let our guard down, or we have felt like we've been vulnerable and it wasn't well received, or we've been told that we're too emotional or too this or too that, right? So I think for each of us, there is a different growth edge and a stretch point to which we want to practice vulnerability. And I think as business owners, maybe this is a little bit different than if you are working for someone else in a preset culture environment at work. But I think across the board, we all sort of tend to struggle with this, right? Like vulnerability is generally uncomfortable because it's stretching us beyond our comfort zone, right? That's sort of in the definition of vulnerability. It is that. It is feeling a little bit unsafe or uncertain, right? And so while that is uncomfortable, it's also something that proves to us and shows us as evidence that we are growing, we are changing, we are showing up, we are being visible, we are putting ourselves out there, we are taking risks. And what we know about taking risks, getting out of our comfort zone, so on and so forth, is that that's what creates growth, that's what creates change, that's what creates impact, that's what creates fulfillment in a lot of ways. And hey, Rebecca, how are you? And I think that this is a really important conversation to have, because for us as women, if we're still sort of living in this paradigm and this camp that vulnerability is weak, we need to first dispel that right now, because we are human, and human first. Above anything else that we are, any other role that we play, we are human, and connection is one of our deepest needs that typically goes unmet, right? We can see this. We live in a world that is generally isolating. You know, I just heard, I was listening to a podcast the other day, a very funny podcast actually, with Dax Shepard and Kristen Bell. And they were talking about how we are designed to live in tribes of like 120 max, right? So as humans, this is the way we've evolved, in tribes of people in small communities. And I think, you know, one piece of that that's cool when we do live in close connection with other humans is that we get a lot of our needs met by default, right? We don't need to like seek them out actively to get our need for connection and love and belonging and all of those things met, because they just are happening in our day-to-day life, and we're getting our needs provided for. Right? And now today, when we are so isolated yet connected through platforms of social media where there are billions of people on a platform that we can see at any given moment, right? That there's this thing that sort of happens that makes us feel even more vulnerable in a weird way, because we're seeing the best of everything and comparing ourselves to that, versus if we were to live in certain like 120 people max tribes, we would all have some kind of superlative duty or job that we were the best at. And now we're sort of comparing ourselves to the best of every tribe, so to speak, right? If we were still living in those ways, we're now able to see everything across the board. And so we feel like that feels vulnerable in some sort of way too, because we're putting ourselves out there and feeling like, ooh, am I going to be judged, or is this good enough, or am I, is this competitive enough? Like, does this have an advantage? Who am I to do this? Am I really that good at this? Is this going to be well received? Yada, yada, right? So I think that this is a really interesting topic to discuss, and very, very timely for a lot of us. And so coming back to this idea that we are human, and in every interaction with another human, we're really asking each other beneath the surface, right? Do you hear me? Do you see me? And do you understand me? And when we feel like the answer to that is yes, then our relationships thrive. We feel heard, seen, and stronger, and we don't feel as vulnerable in the insecure way, right? In the way that we would feel vulnerable as a weakness. When we have that validation from ourselves and from others, we tend to feel less vulnerable, right? We feel like confident, we get self-esteem, there's a lot of good things happening when those things are met, when we feel like the answer to, when we feel heard and seen and visible and strong and powerful and all of those good things, then we tend to feel less vulnerable, right? And the beauty of vulnerability is that when we step out of our comfort zone and make an effort to share something with someone and connect with them in a way, right, then we earn their trust, right? And we take the first step, and we're strong enough, and we feel good enough about ourselves to take the first step and reach out instead of trying to wait for things to come to us. Like, we're actually willing to be a little bit more active in our pursuits versus sitting and waiting and wishing, right? That reminds me of a Jack Johnson song. It is a Jack Johnson song. And I think the thing that feels vulnerable, even though vulnerability is like the most magnetic thing that we can do, the most magnetic act that we can take, the most beautiful, powerful, palpable, potent, all that jazz stuff that we can do in the world, it's really about putting your most authentic self out there, and that can be really polarizing, which is a good thing, but it doesn't feel that way because it's in direct competition with our human need to feel love, belonging, seen, heard, understood, all those things. And so when we get those like haters or trolls or whatever, or people who just aren't getting it, right? That in a way, even though it doesn't seem that way on the surface, in a way that means that we're doing a good job because we're clear about who we are. And I think when we aren't trying to be everything for everybody, that is the most empowering thing we can do. That is the smartest, wisest, most powerful thing that we can do in our lives and our businesses, because we realize that it is not about pleasing everyone. It is not about trying to be everything to everyone or do all the things. Instead, it's about starting to curate our tribe of people who we're really meant to serve, who reinforce our self-given permission to be our fullest and realest selves, and who can truly relate to us human to human, instead of to the shell of the persona that we're trying to create, instead of our true selves, right? Because ultimately when we do that thing, when we try to be perfect, when we try to set forth this perfect image, we end up attracting people who are attracted to that and not necessarily to our true self. And so then we have to feel this imposter syndrome situation where we don't feel like we're measuring up because we weren't just being real from the get-go. And now we've attracted people who are attracted to that persona or image. And now we have to like keep doing it, right? So we're like perpetuating the issue instead of just learning and practicing vulnerability in small ways that lead to big ways, so that we can actually connect human to human, attract the right people, magnetize what's meant for us toward us, so that we can have a life and a business that is truly in alignment with our mission in the world, with our true self. And beyond that, I mean, what is really the point? Right? If we can't be ourselves, and that is actually our greatest strength and gift in the world, what's the point, right? Like, what are you building if it's not going to be worthwhile if you can't do those things and if you don't feel like you can be vulnerable? And I think part of it is obviously the internal piece of that, of feeling comfortable enough in yourself to say, I own who I am, I know who I am, and I'm willing to share that with people, right? And I think a lot of times also vulnerability gets a little bit, there's a fine line when it comes to social media and sharing in business, because you don't want to overshare to the point where it's like way too much for people and it makes them uncomfortable, but you want to share like just enough that you're able to make that connection, but it doesn't feel like you're dumping on them, right? So I think part of it is also, when we're talking about vulnerability in business, it's like taking responsibility for our own stuff and processing it first and then sharing it as a form of connection versus trying to get something from it, like trying to get validation or get what else, like pity or praise or whatever, right? And people can feel that, right? You can sense that when someone's being vulnerable just to get something out of it versus to give and connect authentically. And I think that that's really what makes the difference. And that could be social media, that could be in your content, that could be with your clients, that could be in the workplace, that could be at a networking event, whatever. But ultimately, I think it's important that we use vulnerability as a tool to connect and not as a manipulation tactic to try to seem more fill in the blank something, so that we can then get people to do something, because that's actually very manipulative. So we want to use it as a way that is actually able to connect us in our humanity to other people who are going to relate to us. And it can be vulnerability, I think, can be something big and small, right? Like vulnerability, if you're practicing this and this is new for you and you don't usually do this, could be something like sharing that you love, you know, watching reality TV, and that's something that people might not know about you, or that, you know, for me personally, like I'll share this experience that I had this morning, which is like I went to bar class with a friend, and I am just such a natural rebel that it is so hard for me to do a bar class because it is such like little controlled movements, and it's, you have to be there and stay so focused, and it felt like 10 hours of my life instead of 1 hour. And I was like, oh, I thought we were done. And then it's like, oh, time for our standing series, time for our ab series. And I, like, every time I thought we were done, and I was like, oh God, here we go. You know, it was more of a mental challenge for me as a rebel type than it was a physical challenge, but it was so like tough for me. And does anyone else resonate with that? Like, have you ever felt that way in a situation, right? And so that's an example of what could be a vulnerable share. It doesn't have to be something like a personal trauma that doesn't feel ready yet to share, that you feel like you should just for the sake of being vulnerable with people. Because if it doesn't feel good to you, and it doesn't feel like connection, and it feels like actually really fucking uncomfortable and like too much, then maybe just don't share that yet. It's okay. It doesn't need to be. I think a lot of times we think, oh, I have to be vulnerable, and that means I have to share everything that's going on in my life all the time, no matter what, even if it's uncomfortable for me. And I think there is a level of discomfort, but it should be a healthy level of discomfort where you feel like you're stretching outside of your comfort zone, but it's not so far that it feels like you're ripping off a scab that's not ready to be ripped off, you know? So I think it should feel organic and be used as a way to connect versus a way to manipulate, because I see that a lot also in the online space. So that's one thing. And I think, let's see, where was I? So I think ultimately we just all need to remember that we are human first, and in order to create success that feels sexy and soulful, you must honor the fact that you are human above every other role that you play. And as a human, you also need rest, and you need time to recharge and to just be instead of constantly doing. And this is where boundaries come in. And your power and potency and clarity and all of the best things that you'll do and use in your business come from your being and not from your doing, right? You're a human being, not a human doing. And because your being informs the way that you do everything in life, it is so important that we make space for that deeper connection to ourselves, for the time where we just have space and we're not necessarily creating an outcome or checking off a box, but it's just like curious time with ourselves to say, what feels good right now? What do I really want? And I think boundaries around that time are so important because, one, they usually don't happen otherwise, like that time doesn't actually happen. And two, it becomes very difficult for us to show up to other things and other boundaries if we don't first set them with ourselves, right? I think everything in life and business is like internal first, external second, internal first, external second, and constantly coming back in to check in and see, how does this feel? What do I need? Now what? And asking those harder questions, and then implementing in the external world instead of bypassing how we feel and what we need, because then we end up creating structures and systems and businesses and all this stuff that actually feels like crap and isn't what we need at all. It doesn't give us any sense of fulfillment, even though we might love what we do, the how behind how we're doing it and how we're going about it. If it's boundaryless and if it's completely emotionally shut off, then it's probably not going to work out too well. So I think that, okay, so those are my things about boundaries and vulnerability. And now I want to dive into some questions from some women in our community. So the first question is, what are your thoughts about taking trips and vacations and having an away message on email or an away message on social media and not responding for a week plus? I think that is the greatest damn thing you can do, because honestly, you need it. Right? Like, you need vacation. Like I was saying, you're human first. As a human, you are not like a fucking machine resource. You have emotional needs, you have spiritual needs, you have all different types of needs. And if those are unfulfilled, you're not going to be able to do your work to the best of your ability anyway. You're never going to reach your full potential. So I think, even though it's unpopular, it is the right thing to do to create boundaries in your business and say, hey, I'm going away for a week. Things are going to pause, and the world isn't going to end when I come back to it and I have to respond to emails, right? Or maybe not. Maybe I then delegate that job out to someone else to respond on my behalf. Or maybe, the possibilities and the options are so infinite. And I think it is so necessary. And I can speak to this from both sides of being an entrepreneur and also being an employee. When I was working for the magazine company I worked for in Pittsburgh before I started my business, I actually won a trip to Mexico for a week. And my advisor or supervisor at the time told me, she was like, do not take your computer, do not take your phone, do not do those things, because if you do, then you are in some way not able to relax enough when you're there. You're going to be thinking about work. You're going to feel like you have to check in. Do not take them. And I loved that she said that to me. And that was my first experience in the work world, because that's not typical, I don't think. And I was like, okay, then I'm not. Like, I think I took my iPad and checked email one day, and that was it, and was totally on vacation otherwise, which was awesome. And I think if we're not being present with where we are, so if we are, let's say, setting a half-assed boundary and saying, okay, I'm going on vacation, and then we're actually working the whole time or working part-time, that's taking up a lot of mental real estate when you don't even realize it, right? Because you're going to be thinking about work when you're trying to relax. So there's really no point. You don't end up coming back refreshed. You end up coming back stressed out because you know that you've been avoiding things, or you feel like you've been avoiding things, because I don't think you really do avoid. I think you're just having a boundary and saying, no, I'm not going to do this while I'm away, and I'll get to it later. And I think in our world where we're so connected and expected to be on all the time, that is a revolutionary act. And I think we need to do more of it and make it more commonplace, or else that's not going to change. So that's my response to that one. And I think the best, like when you are away, like, yeah, set an away message. It's such a simple thing to do. And it's also something that helps you feel better about it, gives you that peace of mind, so you actually can disconnect to reconnect to yourself and get your energy recharged, which just, it's a win-win. Okay, the next question is, what are your thoughts of not responding on set days off if you take that in business? Again, yes, that should happen. If we, even I think if you own your own business as well, like, you call the shots, and you don't have to be on all the time, and you shouldn't be, because that would be a disservice to you and to your clients and to every relationship in your life. Because what ends up happening is you're never really present. You're never really all there. You're always half there and half elsewhere. And so if you can be fully present in anything, you are infinitely more powerful at doing that thing and more effective and present. And you get better results. So yes, I think you need time. Typically, I don't do anything on the weekends. My schedule's been a little wonky since I was traveling and whatever, but typically Saturday and Sunday are like, I do not even necessarily force myself to check social media. Like, if it would feel good to me to do it, then I do it. If not, let it go. It's not necessary, right? And I think we've been primed and told, and sort of like the examples that we've seen about what it means to be a modern day entrepreneur is that we can be connected all the time, so we should be. And I think that's BS, and I don't think that we need to be. And I think that actually it's a disservice to everyone and everything if we are. That being said, if you run a business that, if people, say to you, if you tend to get messages from people that might be urgent on Saturday or Sunday, either delegate that or I mean, whatever days you choose to take off, either delegate that responsibility to a virtual assistant or someone else, customer service, or have an autoresponder that says, sorry, we don't respond to emails this day and this day. We'll be back in the office Monday at 8 a.m. or whatever time. Even that can go for responding to emails even during the workday. Like I've seen people do that, and that has been a really positive shift for them, where they only reply to emails at like 10 a.m. and 4 p.m. and that's it. And between then, they're not in their inbox. They're not monitoring their inbox. They're not looking at it, nothing. And they maybe have an autoresponder that says, I only check at this time and this time. But even so, like, I don't think that's even necessary. Like, it's just an efficient thing to do. And it's a boundary that is important. There's one more thing I was going to say about that, but I can't remember. It'll probably come up later. Okay. The next question is, do you find it easy to create boundaries around calls and meetings in later evening? Do you find this turns away potential clients? Okay, so this is actually a really great question, because in the past I've had programs that have operated in the evening and it always felt really crappy to me. And I find that even if someone does work full time, there's usually a way that you can find a lunch break or something else to make that work. I've done it in the past where, sometimes someone will work from home one day of the week and that's when we'll have our call. And I don't think that it's that hard. I think it's a hard shift for you to make mentally, especially in the beginning of your business, because you think that, oh my gosh, well, if I'm not available when they are, then, how are they going to work with me? But I think when someone prioritizes something, they will make time for it, regardless of what it is. And second, if you were going to, let's say, Anthropologie, you don't stop going there because they're only open from like this time to this time. You just find a time and a day that works for you and you go there, right? And I think that it's like, if you were to, like go to Whole Foods and be like, oh, you're not open at 10 p.m. They're not going to open for you. That's their work hours. Like, that's it. That's predetermined. You as the customer fit into that schedule in whatever way that you can, if that's where you want to go, right? So I think that's sort of how I think about it, is what's going to work for me best is ultimately going to work for them best, because I'm going to be able to serve them better when I feel energetically great showing up to that. If I feel like crap, they're not going to have a powerful call with me at 9 p.m. Sorry. Like, you're just not. You're not going to get the best. You're not going to get my best, and we're not going to get the best out of each other. We're not going to have a great coaching session if that's the case. So that's sort of how I think about it. Hopefully that's helpful and answers your question. Okay. The next question is, how much do you allow yourself to share about yourself to your clients? So this is a tough one to answer because it's not necessarily like a concrete measure, but I'd say, like I said before, I like to share things when they're processed. And also I like to say, like, without giving a ton of detail and going into this whole story, like if I get on a call with someone and I'm having an off day, I'll just say, like, I'll check in with them and say, how are you doing today? What's going on for you? What's coming up? And then I'll say, they usually ask me anyway. And I won't go into a whole story because ultimately the session is about them, not about me. But I will acknowledge how I'm feeling. I'll say, like, yeah, I'm a little, like, my energy's a little bit low, or, I'm in my luteal phase right now, or, I'm feeling really energized and excited today, or, just be honest about where I am and where my energy is. And I like to ask them the same thing. So it's sort of knowing where the other person is, I think, is helpful in that way. And then in terms of what I share about myself, I think I share a lot on social media, relatively speaking. Not really like shy about saying things, but if I have, like, let's say an issue in my relationship, I'm not going to blast that all over social media or share that with my clients necessarily, unless it feels particularly relevant and like it could be a point of connection. But I'm not going to go into like, oh yeah, and then he did this and go into a drama story about it, because I don't believe in that. Number one, I don't believe in like victimizing ourselves. I believe that life is our greatest teacher and that we are all teachers and mirrors for one another. So it's never going to be in a way that's like blaming someone, but I will share like what's real for me and what's up. And if it's relevant, you know, I think as a coach specifically, sometimes it is of service to share personal nuggets of what's happening in my life or what's happened in my life in the past. And sometimes it's just totally irrelevant, and I know when that is, and I don't need to say anything, and I can keep that to myself. And that's what my inner circle is for, and my women who support me in sisterhood. And I think that that's an important part of being a leader as well. And maybe this is a boundary conversation as well, is create a boundary for yourself where you don't feel like your work is the only place where you can talk or be heard, you know? And I think that that's why sisterhood is so important and so powerful for me and for all the women that I know who are practicing that actively, and why I invest in myself in coaching and masterminds and things like that, because I know that in order to give, I need to receive, and that is a boundary for me. Like, it is a very clear boundary in my life that if I am going to give more, if I'm up-leveling my give and my output, then I also need to up-level my input at the same time. And that means having spaces that are safe and sacred for myself in sisterhood to be able to share what's going on behind the scenes, so that I don't feel like I have to share that with my clients and that's the only place that I can be heard. I think prioritizing that space where you can receive and be supported and feel heard and witnessed for being 100% yourself, away from the role of leader or entrepreneur, is so, so, so important. And so I guess that would be my roundabout answer to that, is actually you set that boundary for yourself and share what's relevant when it comes up, if it's of service to them. And if not, don't share it, and go share it with someone else. Go share it with, call your mom or call your sisters or call your boyfriend, or talk about it with the women who support you in sisterhood, because that is so, so important for us as women leaders and entrepreneurs. We need that so much. Okay, the next question is, do you consider yourself always on call as to not miss an opportunity to get a new client? Absolutely not. I do not consider myself constantly on call or constantly available. I have boundaries around my work life, because I also need a life, and I know that, and I think we all do. And I know that it's not going to feel good to me if I don't honor that, if I don't honor that I'm a human and I have a life outside of my business. I'm not going to be able to show up to my business, hi Anna, in a powerful way that actually serves people if I'm not taking care of myself and actually living a full life outside of it. So I don't consider myself constantly on call. I think if we do that, it tends to come from a scarcity mindset where we think that, oh my gosh, I'm going to miss this opportunity, or I'm going to miss this client if I set this boundary, right? And if that's the case, then the challenge is not, should you always be on call or not? It's, what do I need to heal within my mindset around scarcity and abundance to be able to change my behavior as a result of that belief shift, so that I can then take different action and get different results, and not hold myself back and be in my own way, believing that if I don't instantly respond to things, that I'm going to miss a client. Because I think ultimately the people who you're meant to serve and who are right for you and you are right for them are going to find you. They're going to wait to work with you if they need to for a few days. It's not that huge of a deal. And usually we think it feels like so much more time for us than it does for them anyway. So yeah, I think that's hopefully answers your question. And the last question I have here, and Anna, if you're watching live, if you want to submit a question in the comment box, I'd love to answer it for you if you have anything today that's coming up for you. And it can be about anything. It doesn't have to be vulnerability and boundaries. Okay, the last question is, how do you decide how much to share on social media? Like how often and how much to share about business, self, etc. I feel like in a lot of ways this is an intuitive call for me, like, or just checking in with what's present or what I'm learning lately or what feels important to share with people. So one is like intuition, and two, like I said before, it's about processing first and not like using your social media platform or your clients or other people as ways to process things. I think as leaders and entrepreneurs, it's super important that we process things first and then share them so that we're not coming from a place of victim or, feeling like we're trying to get something from other people in a manipulative way, even if we mean well. But that we take responsibility for our own stuff and process it first and then be able to share the lesson behind it that we've learned. I think that's the best like golden rule for vulnerability when it comes to social media and sharing things about life or business or anything at all. Yeah, hopefully that answers your question. Anna, okay, my biggest challenge is how to be properly open, if that makes sense. Anna, can you share a little bit more about what you mean about properly open? And then I'll sort of start to answer this question and see what clarification you give me. So I think for each of us, there is a set point of what feels comfortable being vulnerable. And I think that comes from, early childhood. It comes from so many things. It comes from past experience. It comes from the reactions of others when we have been open in the past. And I think, sometimes what feels safer to share are the things that are like complaining or trying to be, connect with people from a place of like a low vibrational energy where that they are, instead of doing what I believe is our job as leaders and entrepreneurs, to sort of like hold a higher vision and hold a higher standard and have more powerful conversations with people that lead to inspiring or adding more light to our world. And so if that's what you mean, Anna, about like properly open, in terms of like, I can be open with someone about like how much I hate X, Y, and Z, but is that adding value to their life or to mine or to our conversation? And is that improving our world? No. If I'm having an open conversation with someone about if they're sharing with me, that they're going through a really tough relationship breakup or something, then I don't necessarily want to say, oh, I totally get it. Here's my experience, and interject my experience and make it about me. I want to be able to witness them and share enough to connect, but not necessarily like dumping my stuff on them or making it about me, really focusing on holding space for someone else. And that is a really open thing to do for someone. And I think when someone else is sharing something vulnerable, or when we are sharing something vulnerable, looking for the lesson versus looking only at the challenge, Okay. Okay, yeah, Anna says, I feel that I'm an open book on everything, but never put those bookmarks in my life. I guess those would be boundaries. So just like what you said, yeah. So yeah, like instead of being, I think it's a good thing to be an open book in a lot of ways. And like I said earlier, like in your personal life, awesome, with people who you trust and who are there to support you, great. If it's in the context though of your business, and you tend to just be an open book and go down the rabbit hole of other people complaining and saying, oh yeah, I know what you mean, and then going into this whole story, that's not really serving anyone. It's not serving you. It's not helping them trust you more. It's not building a strong relationship. It's not making a situation better. So I think using your words wisely and choosing to share things that actually add to like uplift and inspire and energize someone and yourself and the conversation and the relationship that's between you, versus being an open book about absolutely everything and just pouring all your shit out onto the table, I think is really a disservice, because that's not why someone's there, right? That's not probably why someone's coming to do business with you. When it comes to personal life, though, like I said, you should have people in your life that are there to support you, so you don't have to feel like that's the only avenue or pathway that you can share those things with people and be heard and respected and seen. Rather, I think that it's important to build that into your life as a leader, because you are typically the one in the giving position. And what feels vulnerable for a lot of us is receiving, because we are not in control. And so that is a whole different topic in a lot of ways, also the same topic in a lot of ways. But I think that that is so important, that we have space to receive and to be heard and witnessed and just able to be ourselves, whether like all parts of ourselves. And that's why having a coach and having sisterhood and having, you know, people who are supportive in our lives as friends and partners and all that jazz. Oh, okay. Anna says, yes, it's also more of an over positive about everything. Gotcha. Okay, so I used to do this too. And I shared this earlier in the training, but I think it's so important to hold space for someone and to have their own experience. And that helps them to feel like they can trust you and be vulnerable with you, and is vulnerable for you, because you don't, what we do, the reason why we like to be overly positive is because we're actually, we're trying to get rid of that emotion. Like, we're actually very uncomfortable with the emotion that someone's sharing with us. And so we try to like overly positive it, instead of just say, yeah, I can totally see why you might feel that way. And I'm sorry that you're going through that right now. And not going into their rabbit hole, but saying like, I see you and I hear you and I witness you and I honor where you are right now. And I totally get that. And that is a really challenging spot to be in. Or I'm sorry that that's happening for you right now. Is there anything I can do to support you? And that is probably in a way that we wouldn't normally expect it to be. That is such a more vulnerable position than it is to say, to be overly positive about everything, because what we're doing is actually bypassing, because we don't want to feel the discomfort of that emotion. And probably what we do in our own lives, if that's the case in our relationships with others and the way we interact, is that we're not comfortable with our own emotions and our full range of emotions. And so we try to shut them down and only feel the positive. But the thing is that we can't only feel one side of an emotional spectrum. We end up shrinking our entire emotional spectrum. So we almost entirely shut off our emotions. And this goes back to what I was saying earlier about a tendency I notice in a lot of ambitious women, is that we tend to shut off our emotions and not feel comfortable with vulnerability at all. And a lack of vulnerability can look like, you know, ultimately that's like shutting off our emotions, right? So if we only want to feel the positive stuff and we only want to deal with people in the positive, and we're trying to constantly pull them out of what's present for them and bring them into the positive, it's almost like we're not okay with their vulnerability because we're not okay with our vulnerability, because we aren't being honest with ourselves about our feelings and emotions. And if that's the case for any of us, and it was for me for a long time, I think that that's something we need to work on internally first, and then that will translate to our external circumstances and situations and communication and relationships with other people, where we can feel more comfortable being vulnerable because we've addressed it, the core of it, which is really within ourselves and not necessarily about anyone else. So I hope that that was helpful, Anna. And okay, we've been going for a long time. I didn't expect to do this training for so long, but we have another training coming up on Thursday morning at 10:30 a.m. Eastern. So be sure to join us for that and check it out in the events tab in the group. And submit your questions ahead of time so I can help answer them for you and really cater the training toward what you need. And then what else? Oh, I have some half-day intensive spots open and available for March if you're interested in meeting me in Charleston, South Carolina, and doing a 3 to 4 hour intensive soulful strategy for your business, you can reach out to me at emily@emilycastle.com or send me a private message on Facebook, and we can talk about that and set that up for you. I also have spots available at any time, rolling admission for my group program, the Soulful Success Collective. So if you need sisterhood and support on the internal side of your business so that you're balancing out your give and receive, and you need some support with feeling comfortable with vulnerability and setting some boundaries and all of those things, if that's something that you need additional support with, you can find it there. And we meet every single week on Wednesdays, and there are 2 different groups, so you can join whichever one feels like the best time for you to make it every week. We also have a guided meditation and a workbook each month, and accountability partners and a private Facebook group. And it is a really, 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 really fun program and group to be a part of. It's called the Soulful Success Collective, and you can find it on my website at emilycastle.com. Under the Work With Me tab, it's the Soulful Success Collective. So if you're interested in joining that, it's only $197 a month. I may increase the price soon, so if you're feeling called to join us, make sure that you hop in ASAP. All right. Have an awesome day. I will talk to you all soon and see you Thursday. We also have a really great podcast episode coming out this week, which I cannot wait to share with you, with Jessica Smith. So be sure to tune into that and check the group for updates. All right. Talk to you all soon. Bye, loves.